Hi there. This is a short video looking at the game Tet’68 from the Commander magazine in 1992. You can see here the situation, the sun rising there in the east over essentially South Vietnam. The South Vietnam sort of curves around from here. North Vietnam starts up here. Then this region of the map's Laos, and this region is Cambodia with a bit of Thailand impinging in as well. So those three areas are not really used in the basic game. That you can have some guerrilla units from each side. That's counting US Ranger units functioning in a kind of guerrilla capacities, undercover and sneaky movement and so forth, operating in those, so you can affect the Ho Chi Minh Trail that way. But in the regular game it doesn't come in. There is an advanced game which brings in like an all-out war option, so you get a lot more troops. You get these Laotian troops, more US troops, I think some Chinese troops or something like that. I'm just going to talk about the basic game. It looks like a very interesting game, but quite tricky to wrap one's head around what to do. This is the third time I set it up, and so I've had 2 aborted trials going up as far as the third turn. Not that I was getting rules wrong, because the rules are not complicated, and they're clear. I haven't found inconsistencies or anything like that, or anything that I felt needed explaining better, or that looked wrong, so needed errata. But they could be laid out a little bit clearer, and it's that typical thing where there's a bit of a sort of many words, when I'd much rather sort of on where replacements go, and I'd much rather just prefer bullet points and incomplete sentences, just to make it short and sweet. But yes, so what do we have? So it's the NVA army, the ones in the red, are poised to launch their Tet’68 offensive. We have Saigon down here, and Hue is up here. So they have about 15 divisions. There's 10 up here, and there's another 5 or so down here, and then interleaved there's all these paramilitary units, political units, cadres, some kind of ranger type units. So these are all a lot weaker units, sort of interleaved, but they have other functions than straightforward military strikes. So the main military forces are here and here. The orange units are ARVN, and the green are the US, so they are obviously allied together. And then you do get one Laotian unit allied to the US in Laos there, which is operative right from the start. So that game, basic game, or the game itself is 10 turns long, so it lasts up to here. So it's weekly turns from January, the 4th week of January, up to the 1st week of April. Then there's a second game which uses the same components, but I guess some of those extra units. That is the American counterattack. So that's a completely different situation. There's not rules for running the two together. There's a victory check here, and then you would reset and have another victory check there. I suppose it might be possible to run it all the way through. Then there's also several variants. So for example, we have here a bombardment table which doesn't come into effect in the main in the standard game, but if you bring that in as a variant, it simulates heavy US bombardment of North Vietnam, so it can affect NVA reinforcements, replacements, but on the other hand it can affect world reaction, giving victory points to the NVA. Similarly, we also have another table down here, unlimited war reaction table, which that will decide how the unlimited war takes effect. That is a variant, and that is the one that may open up Cambodia, Laos and Thailand to all forces. So these tables are used in the standard game. Those other two aren't. Now how does it play? It's a simple turn system in that you start with, you roll for the weather, and on a 1 on the d6 is bad weather, which will affect movement. Then you go to replacements and reinforcements. There's only ever 2 reinforcements, 2 US units coming as reinforcements. Otherwise, and these boxes hold the dead pile, and they can come back as reinforcements. The or replacements. The replacements are dictated for the MVA by how well they are doing it in victory points. So the higher they're doing victory points, the more replacements they can get. They always get a minimum of 1. And the US, they always get, I think, 1 or 2 ARVN, and then less of US. You've only got 10 turns. So, and things cycle quite quickly. So yeah, you have replacements, then you have movement, then you have combat, and then you can have interdiction. But that's the but that was only in the US player turn. Victory is so it's a very interesting game in that it's first of all, the victory points are 0 sum. So each side could win a tactical, strategic, or one of them could win a total victory. If you get 100 victory points, that's it, game over, quick, immediately, total victory. But otherwise, both sides could perhaps win a strategic or a tactical victory, or nothing. And the way they get their victory points is that you have marked these numbers. These are cities, these are bases, these are popular areas, and you also have American camps. Now, for the cities and the bases, there are victory points possible on gaining them. Then, for example, so it's 2 and 1 normally. Hue is worth 5. Saigon down here is worth 10. And then you have extra thing on that is you have these cadre units. That's that simple one there. If a cadre is in one of these places, you get 3 extra points for Hue, 5 extra points for Saigon, and 1 extra for everywhere else. And that is every turn for the NVA player only. So the NVA player is looking to gain control of cities and bases. And you can see that if they get, say, Hue's 5 points, Saigon's 10, if they get a cadre in each of those, that will up them up to, what did I say? 8 and 15, that's 23, and to get that will get them 23 victory points at the end of a turn. And to get a tactical victory, they need 34 victory points, 67 plus for strategic victory. So the what that means, and it took me a few plays to find out, or a few trial runs to find out, is that the NVA are actually poised for tactical victories straight away. So really they're playing to get strategic victory, and the Americans are playing to catch up, because there's so many cities dotted around. The Americans and the ARVN just don't have enough units to cover them all. Now, that's not to say that the NVA can jump straight into them, because they all have an integral 1 point of strength, and the combat system is interesting. So I'll quickly note that. So essentially in combat you have the Americans have a lot of, they have US air points. They also have the 7th Fleet, which is worth 6 combat points. And they also have Strategic Air Command, which is worth 6 combat points. They can throw those down anywhere where they're fighting in support. So they have 55 air points a turn. Now that's a hell of a lot, but it determines another very interesting facet of the game. So one of the combat systems was interdiction. So the Americans could just use air points to interdict supply routes, and NVA have a supply route going off here, or otherwise up off the north edge. Then there is intelligence combat. Now we have some units. Let's see if I can find one. That's Rangers and paramilitary. These ones, the Kaja ones there, they have P, that's political, that's another here. So these are military intelligence, American military intelligence units. They have an I. Now what that does is, you can see I've set up some units upside down so that they are hidden or underground as it goes. So here's some on the ARVN, and they can only be combated when underground by intelligence combat. And intelligence combat can be risky. It could result in the attacker being ambushed, or the defender is ambushed, in which case you will remove those hidden units, or you could have massive repression. Now, I'm not sure what that results in for the if it's the NVA as the aggressor there, but for the American, they have the choice. They can either eliminate all the underground units there and incur a victory point penalty, or they can just do nothing, have no effect. So there's lots of actions, combat actions specifically by the US, that may incur them a victory point penalty. And the US gain their victory points by eliminating ARVN units. So if it has 0 or 1 combat strength, so that's combat and that's movement factor, they get 2 points. Otherwise they get equal to the combat factors, so they can get up to 5 points for the divisions for each unit. But you can see that to get just a tactical victory, they're going to have to eliminate most of 7 of the divisions, and that is going to be tricky because of what I'll explain now. There's 2, so then you also have regular combat. So we've got the interdiction, intelligence, and regular combat. And let me see if I can get this without that horrendous glare. Turning that off. Okay, so in regular combat first of all, the defender fires first, and they can choose whether they're going for mobile or positional. On mobile, there's no ratio, no differential. You just total your combat factors, roll the die, and then you might inflict a step loss, and most units only have 1 step anyway. Or you might get an R, and that is that you can retreat. So essentially it's saying you're having a quick sort of fire back or just retreating. So you see small units with only 0 or 1 combat factors, they get a 66% chance of just retreating away. The stronger units might want to stand, or basically you're trying to retreat, but if you don't retreat you have a chance of inflicting a loss. So the NVA are often going to choose the mobile table when they're on defence, on their defensive fire roll, to retreat out of the way of the combat. The combat still goes ahead, but if you had, the American can add support units to it. They could always use them as interdiction instead if the enemy is retreated. Otherwise you have the positional table, which is what the American Allied units are going to be going for most. So they're after the defence. So the defender could also fire on this table, so you see you would cause more step losses for a comparable strength, but you wouldn't get a chance to retreat. So and then you roll on this, and this is the step losses that you're going to inflict. And note it goes all the way up to 4 to 7. That's only ever going to happen with the US Air Points added, and maybe the Strategic Air Command and the 7th Fleet. But you're not going to want to play with this table too much, because every time you roll a 6, if the Allied or American Allied units have used combat support, i.e. bombing and so forth, then you roll for collateral damage, and that means that then the NVA will roll again. So say if we were on this column and you rolled a 6, the NVA rolls again, and that is the victory point lost to the American player. So it's tricky decisions with the American. You have to defeat the forces in regular combat, but you might incur a penalty for doing so. And then there's one other form of combat, which is the political combat. So for that you'll use this political combat results table, and that works with those on both sides. You have these political units, and that is when you are in a city or base, and the NVA have bases and a few cities which the US could take, and the US also and their allies like there's an ARVN cadre with a political combat ability. You roll on this table, and that can you will either gain, and that happens at the end of the turn after regular combat. So that could simulate it within a week. You're moving into a city. Your regular forces could take a city. Then you send in a political unit, or you've sent in a political unit with them, and they will fight for the hearts and minds. And that could give you up to 5 points, 5, 1 or nothing, or you could have a negative 1 to 5 victory points. So it's a bit risky, and I think things could be a bit swingy by that way. So it's going to be a fluid situation. The last thing I should remember before I bring this to a close is the underground movement. Now, not every unit can go underground. Only the smaller, like the cadre, the paramilitary units, some ranger units, and yeah, you have military police, you have air mobile, but they don't go underground. The underground units, they can move through enemy units. There's no zones of control, so that again makes it very fluid. And also this fact that you could have a perimeter all the way around a city, but the enemy can infiltrate it. The units cannot flip from being underground to overground if there are opposing units in there. But as soon as you move out, they could flip out. So it behooves you to keep places garrisoned, and of course you don't have enough units to do that. Now there's more wrinkles. There's Dartran markers, so the MVA gets a chance to do sort of all-out effort. 5 times a turn they bring those back as replacements, and Dartran is total struggle. What else? There's there's a lot in it. So there's these popular areas. You can gain political combat in the popular areas as well as the cities and bases. There's supply is in it, but it's all done very simply. Like movement is basically, terrain doesn't affect movement except that mechanized units use all their movement to go in any point of terrain, but they get 6 point bonus on the roads. So mechanized units can whiz around on the roads. You have air mobile units that can hop around, and then the foot units have between 5 and some have just 3 movement points, moving sort of slowly, but it's simple. You're not checking terrain effects, a whole load of terrain effects. It's similar for the combat. So it's a clean system, but there's lots in it. It is a Joe Miranda game, so it's like many of his other games, and yeah, I'm on my 3rd go with it, and I will post up a turn example when I reach a suitable point to be able to do that. So far, having been into it, having spent a fair number of hours already on it, I would say, and the bit of time that was summarising everything, it really needed like a cheat sheet, because there's so many different things, like apart from the standard things like steps, stacking, movement, you have to special rules for underground units, different rules for national borders. Some units can go over them, some can't. Then there's the self-defense areas, so cities, bases and camps, how they work. The popular areas, riverine units, supply, and then of course the 4 different types of combat, and then just quick notification of how replacements and victory points work. So that's really facilitated the game. Otherwise there's not a ton of rules, and there's about rules out about 50% more again in the variants, which is fantastic. So I think there's a lot of playability in this game, and it's also, like I said, it's a struggle to wrap my head around. It's going to result in a very different style of gameplay than one is normally used to. So it's not your standard sort of operational panzer pusher. A lot more fluid and a lot more thinking outside that usual box on how to do the tactics. So I've been refining the setup each time I set it up again, think again how things are. Essentially, the NVA are poised for their initial lunge, but they can't take every city, and then they're going to have to try and melt away quite quickly before the US can muster enough forces in an area to crack down on them. So anyway, an interesting looking game. I will stop here and adios.